Hi everybody, Kirkland here. I'm here to do the next tome, Tome 10, Saw. So let's get started.
Amanda feels her heart racing as the test subject screams on the television screen. She observes him as he looks down at the see-through cylinder pressed against his bare abdomen. Several rats are trapped inside the cylinder, screeching against the subject's skin. The thermometer inside displays 97 degrees Fahrenheit. The rats are agitated. Stuck between the glass and his stomach, they cannot escape the heat. Amanda is pleased to see the subject cry as rats claw at his skin. Then he succumbs to his flaw, activating the trap's last mechanism. Amanda feels a jolt of adrenaline as a board rises inside the cylinder glued to the subject's abdomen, opposite to the ravenous rats, letting through a hissing cobra. The snake uncoils, and the rats go wild. They claw and gnaw madly at the subject's stomach to escape the snake. One rat ventures inside the subject's gut. Amanda smiles as she watches him scream in agony. Game over. Amanda feels exhilarated as she rushes to the next room to find John Kramer, but her heart sinks when she is welcomed by John's exhausted frown. He wipes the sweat off his brow and praises her efforts, but criticizes her plan. Suffering seemed to be the trap's sole design.
Pain can be used as punishment, but first it must be offered as redemption.
Amanda frowns. After all her hard work, how could he doubt her? His teachings are law. This new chance in life is too precious for her to squander away. She looks up as John leans over the table to catch his breath. His inhale turns into a coughing fit, and she hands him a bottle of water. Amanda can see that their time together is limited. There can be no room for mistakes. She will be his successor and continue what he started. John staggers inside the meat plant. Dark circles are under his eyes, as if he has not slept in weeks. Amanda usually sleeps no more than 4 hours per night, less so before a test. The excitement keeps her wide awake. Amanda's eyes fall on the large folder in John's hands. Another test? John nods. He is compiling information on Grace Wright, an amiable politician campaigning for the upcoming election. Amanda watches him as he massages his temples. He looks worse than last week. How long did she have to learn everything about his craft? A few years? A couple of months? To protect their legacy, she needs to be ready when the time comes. She must continue John's work as Jigsaw, the successor. Amanda reaches for the folder in his hands. Let me show you what I can do. John's tired eyes stare at Amanda, who holds his gaze firmly. She is ready, and they are running out of time. He nods reluctantly. Amanda turns on the television and sees Grace Wright's beaming face on the screen. The elections are tonight. Several sheets slide over the printer's tray, falling at Amanda's feet. She snatches them from the ground. Earlier today, she broke into Grace's inbox to find her flaw. The test must be perfect. Perhaps John will be able to rest once he is convinced that his life's work is in capable hands. Amanda pores over a series of documents and emails exchanged between Grace and a lawyer from 10 years ago. A certain Ben Fairfax threatened to expose a scandal relating to when Grace joined the city council. The lawsuit was settled swiftly. But the emails continued between Grace and her lawyer. Amanda found a report showing that Xanax Industries, a copper exporter in the area, poured waste directly into the Hilford River, contaminating the groundwater. The city's decayed century-old water lines were unable to filter the filth. Grace covered up the lawsuit to avoid adding to the city's increasing taxes. For 10 years, filth has been poured into the water of Grace's oblivious voters. Amanda looks down at the glass of water sitting on her desk. She dumps it into the sink and grabs a bottle of vodka from the freezer. Icy bitterness rolls off her tongue, hitting her palate with a herbal kick. Not an ideal way to hydrate, but safer than Hilford tap water. On the television, confetti are falling on Grace's smooth brown hair. The polls are in, and Grace Wright has been elected as mayor. Amanda receives a cryptic message from John. When she meets him at the Gideon meat plant, her doubts are confirmed. John looks pale and frail. The side effects of his medication seem as draining as the disease itself. His gait is slow and meticulous, as if he is calculating the cost of each step. Amanda grabs his arm to help him sit down. He can no longer conceal his pain, not from her. She examines him as he catches his breath. Beads of sweat are purling above his brow. Her leader, her mentor, her father is dying. Amanda clenches her fist. What will I do without him? Panic twists her stomach in knots, and then another sensation. Something akin to trepidation. No, excitement. A thrilling rush of freedom. Complete control. John asks about Grace's test, and Amanda reassures him. His legacy is in good hands. She will prove it to him. Amanda's temples are throbbing. It has been weeks since she slept more than 2 hours per night. She pops a painkiller in her mouth and winces as the pill scrapes her dry throat. She ignores the bitter taste lingering in her mouth as it melts. No time for sleep or water. She is scouting the sinuous tunnel network under the Gideon meat plant for Grace's test. The throbbing grows acute, and Amanda massages her temples while walking. Her head feels as if it's going to explode, but she cannot stop. John needs her. This migraine will cease soon enough. Her mentor has no such privilege. She has little time left by his side. Eventually, all tests will be her responsibility alone. When the time comes, she must be ready. Amanda points her flashlight at the blueprint of Gideon's underground and retraces her steps. While examining the vast tunnel network, another thought crosses her mind. Soon, Gideon will be her domain. A thrilling sensation of alarm and excitement follows that thought. Her flashlight illuminates a familiar fork in the tunnel. Left leads to the underground bathroom, and right leads to the meat plant's wastewater. To follow in John's footsteps, she must craft a test that aligns with Grace's flaw. A corrupt ambition to rise and become mayor while sacrificing the health of thousands. It is time to give the mayor a dose of her own poison. Amanda crawls into the tunnel on her right. Amanda is hiding in Grace's bathroom behind the drawn shower curtain. Her heart is racing as she waits for the perfect moment to strike. This is her favorite part. Adrenaline is flowing, heightening her senses. She feels like she can take on the entire world without fatigue or pain. She feels awakened, despite not having slept for days. Waiting for her prey, she feels alive and powerful, every second stretching into a blissful, intense high. That is the real power of John's teachings, a second chance at living in a heightened state of mind. Amanda hears the door creak open in the hall. She strains to hear if someone is with Grace. A pair of footfalls confirm what Amanda already knows from Grace's schedule. The mayor is alone tonight. The bathroom door screeches open. As soon as Grace steps inside, Amanda strikes. A fight follows between the two women as water spills over the rim of the bathroom sink. Amanda slams Grace's face into the mirror. Grace shrieks and headbutts Amanda, and a jolt of pain courses through her masked nose. Amanda stumbles backward, but the adrenaline kicks in. She is ready for this. Grace pounces on her and grabs her pig mask, but Amanda elbows Grace in the gut and leaves her gasping. As Grace catches her breath, Amanda rolls over and slams Grace's head into the heated floor. Grace is knocked out. Amanda is toying with a water bottle made of glass. A pile of keys lies on the table in front of her. None of them matter, except for one. She should insert this key inside the bottle, but Amanda hesitates. If she does, Grace could use it to escape. A freshly elected mayor would make a useful ally and a powerful successor for John. Amanda's grip tightens on the bottle. She would do anything for her mentor, even betray his teachings. Redemption should only be granted to a select few, after all. She pockets the real key and drops a fake inside the bottle. Then she throws the bottle into a pool of meat wastewater. This is Amanda's design as the rightful and only successor of John Kramer. Game on.
Moving on with David Tapp.
Weariness clings to Detective David Tapp as he exits the car. He straightens his shoulders and sucks in a deep breath, but he knows it's still there, in his eyes. They always betray him. The stroll up the sidewalk to Mr. and Mrs. Serenko's home is brief. He wishes he could stretch it out, take each step slower than the last, but this was his choice. He volunteered to tell them their missing son, Shane, is dead. Should have taken the vacation. Could be on the beach frying up slabs of meat. What the hell was I thinking? He was so close to getting on that plane. At the airport, waiting to board, his wife's hand reaches out, locks her fingers around his, squeezes tight. He squeezes back without thinking. In his other hand is the coroner's report on the Jigsaw killer's latest victim. He promises he'll only glance over it, then stow it for the rest of the week. Female, 37 years old, fragment of a drill bit found in the wound on her hip. Unconventional design, custom made for a company that went belly up in the 80s. Tapp remembers the company's logo. Grew up a few blocks from their factory. Could the place still be abandoned? It's too important to leave to someone else. He can cancel the plane tickets, take the loss, and try again in a few days. He turns to tell his wife. A tear streams down her face before he even opens his mouth. It sounds like someone else's voice when he says it. Your son Shane is dead. There's an outpouring of emotion on the parents' faces. Shock, devastation, agony. Too much for a single word. It's as if they're cycling through trauma with each second, pouring it from their bodies in howls and cries. Tapp stands and waits, tries to ignore the discomfort, reminds himself that what they're going through is far worse. He's a spectator, torn between offering condolences and leaving them to their grief. Either choice lacks sincerity. All these years, and he still doesn't know what to do. No one ever does. The father screams, and it reminds him of Shane. It brings him back to where it started, as memories from hours past take over. He remembers it clearly. He arrives at the factory. It's abandoned. He snoops around, checking for signs of forced entry. 20 minutes pass. No footprints, broken windows, or snapped fences. A nagging doubt starts from the back of his mind and pushes forward. Left your wife behind to trounce around an empty lot in some old-as-shit building? This is one hell of a vacation. There's an apology forming somewhere, but it sounds no different than the past few. Still, better put something together before he heads home. She's had hours to talk to her mom, and that woman will fan the flames just to watch him choke on the smoke. Get some flowers, or too cliché? Yeah. Well past the point of floral arrangements counting as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Anyway, there's no... A sudden noise. A scream? It was barely audible, in a range that makes him question if his mind is playing tricks on him. Hold up. Don't rush this one. Take a close... screw it. He needs to be right about this. Close the case so he can go home, tell her it's over. He's sorry. He messed up. He's a bastard. That's behind him. He'll make it right. Just stick around. He'll make it right. Shoulder up. He takes a running start and slams into a rickety door. Mrs. Serenko asks him to come in and talk over tea. He'd rather find a bar stool and a place to hang his head, somewhere where only a waitress will interrupt. He wants nothing more than to decline the invitation. Of course, anything I can do. I'm happy to stay and talk. He settles onto a dusty couch, letting his tea go cold on the side table, chai spice. Wife used to make it for him when they started dating. Didn't like it then either, but he'd drink it anyway. It made her happy. Maybe it made him happy too. Hearing the kettle whistle, sipping at a teacup, seemed like the kind of thing married people do. Can't remember when she stopped serving it. Shane's parents smile between tears as they recount stories of their son. Every now and then reality hits and one of them chokes up, excusing him or herself for a minute. Tap moves his hand alongside his radio, hoping that a voice on the other end requests his help. Mrs. Serenko dabs her eyes as she recalls the last year of Shane's life. Such a gentle boy, that one. He was broken-hearted over his fiancée leaving. Wanted to make things right with her, but never really did. She just kind of got away. And he fell apart, dropped out of college, drifted day to day without a path to stand on. Never really recovered. Stopped living, I guess. Lost that sparkle. Tap reacts with a consoling look, but inside, he's mentally recording the information for his report. Testing those who have given up on life. It fits Jigsaw's M.O. Shane lost his will and abandoned his future. That's some kind of sin in this madman's book. The sick asshole strapped the poor kid into a trap to teach him a lesson. Discomfort being necessary to mend a broken heart. Could be. At this point, he knows Jigsaw better than he knows anyone. Shit. Anyone. He tries to rattle the thought from his head, finds some other memory to torture himself on. Mrs. Serenko's voice in the background decides for him. Shane. He had the chance to save him, and he blew it. The scene plays over again in his head, beating against his skull like a bad hangover. His eyes adjust to the darkness of the abandoned factory. Slivers of light pierce the gaps in the boarded-up windows. Stale air fills his lungs. He paces forward, moves between a row of shelves, looks to the floor, sees footprints in the thick dust. With a calm, steady movement, he unholsters his gun, stops, listens, waits to see if the intruder will give themselves away. Nothing but silence. Takes another step forward and... Metal screeches on the concrete floor. The shelf beside Tap leans towards him, looming tall, heavy. Adrenaline takes over. Time appears to slow. For a millisecond, he intercepts a thought intended for his subconscious. Will she cry when they tell her I'm dead? Neurons fire for one singular purpose. Jump. Shift weight, push off, extend arms, brace for impact. He hits the ground hard. A deafening crash echoes around him. He looks back to see the shelf collapsed where he was a split second ago, his gun pinned beneath it. Footsteps barrel along the floor. A cloaked figure flees into the shadows. Tap jumps to his feet and gives chase. He sprints after the fleeing figure, trying to catch a glimpse beyond their cloak. He shouts to stop, knowing it's futile, but... Mr. Tap? Officer? He's abruptly pulled from his thoughts. Mrs. Serenko patiently holds a photo out to him. He doesn't want to see it. He'd rather turn his attention to his tea, take a cold sip and stare at residue swimming along the bottom. He knows he can't. As much as the guilt rises in his throat like bile, he knows he has to play his role in this ritual. He takes the photo. A young Shane, dressed for prom, smiles at him, a bright, eager grin. But what Tap sees quickly fades until all that's there is a murdered boy, pain and fear etched onto his face. Then he remembers. There was something else in Shane's eyes when he first saw him. Hope. The belief that maybe he would be saved. That one hurts most. Tap chases the cloaked figure into a dimly lit room, electronic beeps ringing out as he enters. He stumbles, nearly freezing in shock at what's before him. A terrified young man stands 15 feet away, metal hooks piercing his back and arms, keeping him from moving. A jackhammer is propped in front of him, chained and locked to his neck and torso, its tip pointing into the left side of his chest. On the wall behind him is the picture of a heart, broken in two. A timer counts down, 45 seconds. Shane screams, stretching for a ring of keys dangling in front of him, hooks ripping at his back and arms. Blood trickles down his body. Tap runs to him. Hold on, kid. Breathe. Breathe. Don't move. Tap grabs the key ring, picks a key at random, shoves it into the lock around Shane's neck, forces it. Nothing. Grabs another. Useless. Hands shake, looks at the timer. Another one. No luck. Footsteps patter along the concrete. The cloaked figure emerges from the shadows and makes a run for it. There's still time to catch them. Shane screams, his hurried breath making his words incoherent. Tap looks back to him. Damn, hold still. Almost got you. Another key that won't work. Or was that the one he tried before? That can't be right. Which? The cloaked figure races towards an emergency exit. There's no time for Tap to think. Tap stands at the front door as Mrs. Serenko puts a hand on his shoulder, offering him a sad smile. She thanks him for being with Shane in his final moments, for providing what comfort and support he could. I know that made a difference for him. Shane never did well with being alone. Tap's mouth dries out, heart drops into his stomach. He tries to form a word, but only clears his throat. He nods and hopes that's enough. Pulling his jacket on, he turns, tries to find his footing as he paces away from the house, the walk longer than he remembers. He wants to shout, or collapse silently, maybe both. He reaches for his phone, scrolls to his wife's number. This was the routine. Call her. Tell her it was a rough night. He'd bring home ramen, maybe some beer, stay up, talk, watch reruns on TV, wake up on the couch wondering who fell asleep first. His thumb hovers over the send button, but he can't bring himself to press it. Too late for that. No matter where she is, she's gone. Long gone. Just him and Jigsaw now. The realization shakes him. The burden pushes down, unconfessed, unconsoled. Without her, the memory of what really happened to Shane burrows in and festers.
That was kind of gross, and I've never seen the movies for that reason. I've always been afraid of that. But let's go ahead and continue.
Arcus, 27. Most of the fiction featuring Hattie and Jordan end with one of the siblings disappearing, which accounts for some of the contradicting memories I've discovered in the fog. I believe there are several actual Hatties and Jordans stuck here with all the others. The memories I've studied so far conflict with one another so that they rarely line up with each other or the fictional stories I found in the Chamber of Blood. However, I must always remember that the collected stories and artwork in the chamber are interpretive. They are not exact, and they were more or less inspired by several versions of the siblings that exist, or will exist, or have existed within the endless tapestry that is the Omniverse. The truth is, the unknowns have collected so many stories that I don't know where to begin my research. Currently, I am focusing on the Red Crane and 12 to Midnight to better understand how the Black Fog works and how the characters in these stories may have been able to interact with it to their advantage. There are also many versions of déjà vuism that relate a story of how one man found a way into the darkest recesses of this dimension to save the one he loved. But the story doesn't go into the details of how he managed to find a way in, and I will have to go through other versions of the story to see if there is any information that can help me. Better yet, I am hoping to find his actual memories within the fog to give me a sense of how he found a way into this realm. Chamber of Blood, Day of Night, Mahan Singh, 1. Mahan Singh spent 17 years amassing a fortune for his estranged niece by leading mercenary missions all over the world for Leviathan Securities. A decorated soldier in the Indian Army, Mahan was discharged after 13 years of service for disobeying orders while on assignment for the United Nations. Shortly afterward, he joined Leviathan and found himself on a series of strange assignments that involved securing haunted locations and procuring strange artifacts of an occult nature. Locations and artifacts that seemed worthless, but were of grave importance to governments and organizations for some reason or another. Mahan didn't know what to make of it. To him, it all felt like a kind of invisible war between secret societies that were somehow able to use governments and corporations like pieces on a chessboard for a bunch of old, moldy books and geometric trinkets from forgotten civilizations. Now Mahan was pinned behind a crumbling wall in a village in the outskirts of Nairobi, Kenya, with his fallen units scattered in pieces all over the surrounding dirt roads. He had been fighting all day against different units and was fresh out of luck and ammunition. "There's no way out of here," he told himself. "I've got no support, no ammunition, no luck." "Why do you need luck when you have a weapon and your wits? You've been in worse situations and survived. Think you were beaten, and you were beaten. I am beaten. You are almost beaten, and that's not the same thing." Suddenly, Mahan heard the surrounding mercenaries yelling at one another in Russian. They were planning an attack and coordinating with one another. He peeked around the corner, then ducked fast as several rounds punched holes into the wall, sending clouds of dust and stone into the air. He cursed in Punjabi, grabbed his automatic rifle, then craned his head ever so slightly to see fast-moving silhouettes against the full moon, closing in on his position. Quickly, he crawled into a nearby home and hid the asset, the ancient scroll, underneath several corpses of British agents he had killed just before the Russians had decided to join their party. Then he hid in the shadows, holding his rifle by the barrel, refusing to die without a fight. "They probably all work for the Collector," he told himself. "Crazy rich man with too much time and money on his hands. Shaw just wants to make sure he gets the scroll before another eccentric billionaire beats him to it. And from where does this prize come? It supposedly comes from a lost elder civilization with advanced and forbidden knowledge. Nonsense, all of it. A bunch of ancient stories about pagan priests and barbaric rituals and cosmic deities told around a campfire. Ancient sci-fi at best. Taking a deep breath, Mahan heard their almost inaudible footfalls before he saw them. His eyes narrowed and his face hardened as two mercs entered the moonlit doorway. With a groan, he launched himself into the air, smashing the butt of his rifle against one head and then the other. Both mercs collapsed to the ground, unconscious. A split second later, Mahan yanked a loaded rifle from the hands of one of the fallen mercs and rushed through the doorway, taking cover behind a well spilling over with thick, buzzing flies like living black soup. Inside the well were the rotting bodies of those who had sought the scroll but had found death instead. Mahan buried his nose in his arm and suppressed an instinct to retch. Then, seeing a merc, he lifted his rifle and pulled the trigger. Bullets tore holes through the neck and face as the mercenary staggered back and forth, then fell against a wagon with the pulpy head hanging by a shred of flesh. As he searched the shadows for other mercs, Mahan suddenly heard the crunch of stone behind him. He whirled to fire. A second too late. Several rounds pounded into his Kevlar vest like a jackhammer, sending him stumbling backward into the black soup of death. A moment later, the surviving mercs loomed over the mouth of the well as a thick black fog coiled around them like a snake. Taking a deep breath, Mahan closed his eyes and waited for a death that never came. Instead of a report ripping through the darkness like a clap of thunder, he heard a scream, followed by a cry and then shrieks of agony. When he opened his eyes, the mercs were gone, as though they had been erased by the fog. Mahan struggled through the putrid blood and fluids to climb up and out of the well. As he pulled himself over the gore-covered mouth, he noticed the world had been plunged into an abyss of fog. Before he could make any sense of what was happening, something snatched his ankle hard and tried to pull him back down. Desperately, Mahan gripped the edge of the well and held on tightly. He looked to his feet where he saw multiple hands yanking and clutching at his legs. He held on for dear life, but his hands slipped in the blood and gore and soon gave way. With a terrible cry, he fell back into the gore as bony hands clawed at his legs, his arms, his throat, his beard, his nose, his turban, and pulled him deeper and deeper into the darkness. Needles of pain burst inside his head as he drowned in thick fermenting blood. He knew with a strange resignation that he was dying, or that he was already dead, and that he would never know his niece or what had become of her. After his wife and parents had died in a plane crash and his brother had disappeared, she was the only one left. She was his only family, and he swore he would always take care of her. But then life happened, and in the end he had only taken care of himself. He had lived a lonely, selfish life, counter to his upbringing and his beliefs. He was a walking contradiction who had somehow convinced himself that he was cursed, that everyone he had ever loved died or disappeared, and that he was doing his niece a favor by staying out of her life. He had somehow convinced himself that he was keeping his bad luck away from her, while he amassed a fortune that he would one day leave her. But Mahan knew it was all a lie. He didn't know the first thing about nurturing and raising a human being. Raising his brother's daughter terrified him, and that's why he had clung to any reason he could to abandon her. All he knew was killing and destroying in the name of governments and corporations. And as the darkness swallowed him whole, Mahan realized in horror that killing and destroying was all he would ever know. Mahan had failed his ancestors, he had failed his family, he had failed his brother and his niece. He would never know her hopes, her dreams, her likes or dislikes. He would know nothing, except the inky blackness that swept over his eyes and the unnameable terrors that awaited him in the great unknown. Mahan opened his eyes with a start. He was still in the well, submerged in the putrid death stew, staring up at thick black fog drifting over him, as he heard a whirring sound. The sound of a motor accelerating and decelerating somewhere in the distance. He took a moment to gather his senses. He didn't remember much. He remembered being shot, stumbling back, and falling into the well. Everything after that moment felt like a nightmare that had been inspired by one of his father's stories. The one where unarmed, peaceful protesters were shot dead and stuffed into a well, and left to rot in the blistering Punjab heat. With a painful groan, Mahan reached out with trembling hands to a jutting rock, and with difficulty pulled himself free from the gore. Rock by rock, he climbed his way up the festering throat of the well and finally pulled himself over the mouth and into the thick black fog. A cry sounded over the incessant whir of the machine, and Mahan quickly realized he wasn't in Kenya anymore. He stood and took in his surroundings. There were strange structures like factories submerged in the fog. Scattered around the structures were piles of clothes and bodies set ablaze. Above in the pale red sky, crows circled and cawed, adding to the oppressive cacophony. "Help, please." Mahan heard a woman crying for help coming from a bank of fog. Snapping out of his daze, he extended his hands and waved a tunnel through the fog, searching for the source of the sound. "Help, someone, please." The disembodied voice reached him again, and she somehow seemed close and far at the same time. He froze to listen carefully, but all he could hear was the incessant whirring of the motor accelerating and decelerating. "Help." There it was again. He moved left, then right, and finally he reached a woman in pilot fatigues, stuck in a trap of twisted barbed wire. Without a word, he pulled the metal thorns out of her legs as she winced and squirmed in pain with every movement. "I don't know what happened, or how I ended up here." Her voice trailed away, and she seemed bewildered. "What's the last thing you remember?" Mahan asked as he struggled with the barbed wire. The pilot stumbled back and answered with intermittent groans as she nursed her wounds. "I was on patrol, soaring through clear blue skies, when this black cloud suddenly appeared, and then the plane began to shake and break apart, and I don't know, I was here." A sudden click, and they both turned wide-eyed to face the barrel of a rifle. Behind the rifle, a man in black fatigues appraised them. "Who the fuck are you two?" Mahan raised a hand. "Wait, careful. We're not a threat. We're just as confused as you." "Who are you and what are you doing in Texas? Are you CIA? Is this some kind of test?" Mahan gritted his teeth. "This ain't a test, and I'm pretty sure this ain't Texas." "Who are you?" The agent shoved his rifle in Mahan's face. But before Mahan could answer, a Japanese woman in a black and red kimono emerged from the fog, unsheathing a katana with a high-pitched ring. She yelled at them in Japanese, and Mahan extended a calming hand to her. "Please, put the sword down." He then turned to the agent. "Please, put the gun down. Let's figure this out." "Who are you?" the agent yelled, pushing the muzzle in Mahan's face. "I won't ask again." "I can tell you who I am, but that's not the question, is it?" "Yeah. What's the question, then?" "Where?" Mahan said flatly, motioning to the destroyed factories, the craters, and the smoldering piles of trash and bodies. "I should think the question is, where? Where are we?" Another voice came from behind. "He's right, you know." Mahan turned to watch a man with a police jacket emerge from the fog. "We're still trying to figure that one out. Right now, we should all be asking, how?" "How?" Mahan repeated. "Yes," the detective said. "How much time do we have before the horror finds—" Before he could finish his sentence, a shriek, followed by a high-pitched whine, startled them. A moment later, a mass of melded humanity and machine came at them. Mahan could make out several heads, all shrieking battle cries in different languages, attached to a patchwork of charred scraps from missiles, tanks, fighter jets, and nuclear submarines, all bearing flags and strange logos of brands from different periods he vaguely remembered. He stared at this monstrous chimera in shock and wasn't quite sure what he was looking at. The horror, he called it, looks more like the embodiment of war. Sponsored war. Mahan swallowed a thickness growing in his throat as the horror rushed the stunned agent and tore his head off, swallowing the terrified face and dripping neck like a ripe cherry. Then its ghastly mouth opened wide, and a stream of fire torched the jerking headless corpse as it collapsed into a heap of industrial garbage. Not waiting to be next, the samurai lunged at the monstrosity, and with incredible speed and precision, cut it to pieces. Then all of them watched in disbelief as the pieces of flesh and metal slowly disintegrated into the living fog. The detective sighed.
It will be back,
he said, appraising the samurai.
18th or 19th century, Red Crown clan. You're not the first. We could definitely use your skills here.
The samurai sheathed her katana and grasped at the fog as though trying to capture pieces of it to study, as though she recognized it. Mahan approached the detective. Where exactly is here? But the detective didn't answer. He merely turned his back on them and walked away, saying,
Follow me, if you want to escape.
Mahan took in a deep breath and gathered his senses. Then he took to his heels and followed the detective into the unknown with the samurai and the fighter pilot in tow. Mahan followed the detective through a labyrinth of bombed-out factories and mountains of garbage set ablaze. At the center of this industrial hell was a giant machine with hooks and cameras and television screens of every possible brand and size, broadcasting moments of Mahan's life, as though his brain was a Wi-Fi signal that could stream his memories, his darkest memories. And not just his memories, but the memories of the samurai, the pilot, and the detective. It was as though they had been selected by some unnameable and incompressible intelligence for mere entertainment. The detective stopped when he reached what seemed to be a submarine hatch, surrounded by a pile of smoldering trash and mangled, charred bodies.
Get in,
he yelled, opening the hatch.
I'll explain what I know when we're safe.
Where does it lead? Mahan asked.
Away from here, the detective said, and that's all you should care about right now. We don't have time for explanations, but when we're safe, Ben will answer all your questions as best he can. Right now, you need to...
A clanking noise suddenly interrupted him.
Go, go, go!
The detective yelled as the horror came at them from the shadows. Instantly, he pulled out his flashlight, distracting the horror as Mahan and the others escaped down the hatch.
Okay, you guys, this part of the chapter was really long, and I'm just gonna end this part of the recording and start another one so that we have more time, because I don't want to run the recording short. I came within like literally 90 seconds the last recording, so I'm gonna stop this one and we'll be right back. See you again. Take care.